What's up everyone, and welcome to another Warframe video. So with the recent introduction of Banshee Prime and her arsenal set, one of the weapons that came within that set was a new secondary called the Euphona Prime. Now, from the early comments by many of the players who started using this weapon, it sounds like it's a very powerful secondary and probably will become a mainstay weapon for many of the players' secondary arsenal. So what I wanted to do in this video was compare this weapon to some of the more traditional hard-hitting secondaries such as the Aklex Prime as well as the Vaykor Marelok. Now, this really isn't a video of which weapon is better, but I just wanted to see the characteristics of how these three weapons compare with each other. Now, why I'm using the Aklex Prime instead of the Lex Prime is because, of course, recently with the release of the Aklex Prime, I used my Lex Prime to create this weapon. And although there are some advantages with the Lex Prime, such as the reload speed as well as the accuracy, since I don't have the Lex Prime anymore, I had to settle with the Aklex Prime. Now, I'm hoping that the Aklex Prime is close enough to the Lex Prime in terms of the statistics that it will be a reasonable representation of that weapon. So as you may know, the Aklex Prime is the dual-wielding version of the Lex Prime, and it basically has the same damage stats or the physical damage stats as the Lex Prime. It also has the same critical chance of 25% and the same status chance of 25%. Now, there are some advantages to the Aklex Prime. It has a larger magazine as well as a higher firing rate. However, it also has some disadvantages over the Lex Prime, such as lower accuracy, greater weapon recoil, as well as a longer reload time. Despite some of these differences, the basic damage characteristics of the two weapons are very similar, so you could compare the Aklex Prime or use the Aklex Prime and represent it for the Lex Prime characteristics as well. So the high puncture physical damage combined with a very balanced and high critical chance and status chance make both the Lex Prime and Aklex Prime very popular secondary weapons amongst players. Now, because of the high puncture damage, with the correct mods you can make this a very hard-hitting weapon, and because of the high critical and status chance you could do either a critical build or a status build depending upon your preference. Now, the Vaykor Marelok is the Steel Meridian Syndicate version of the Marelok pistol secondary. It's quite popular because it hits very hard and it's quite accurate at close range, although at longer range it does lose its accuracy. Now, because of that and because of this unusual animation that you get when shooting the gun, it does feel a little bit more like a hand shotgun than it does a pistol, but overall it's still a very popular weapon. Now, although each one of the individual damages, impact, puncture, and slash, is not as high as the puncture damage of the Lex Prime or the Aklex Prime, the total damage from all three physical damage becomes higher than that of the Aklex or the Lex Prime, and so overall this weapon hits harder than the Lex Prime or the Aklex Prime. In addition, it has a lower critical chance and a lower critical multiplier, but it actually has a higher status chance than that of the Lex or the Aklex Prime. So though you can build the Vaykor Marelok as a crit weapon, with such a high status chance, it would be a shame not to put in some sort of status capability into the weapon. And though you can build it for both crit and status, this would be a weapon that definitely will favor a status build. Now, unlike the other two weapons, the Euphona Prime is a true hand shotgun. And from the initial look at the statistics of the weapon, it looks like it would be a perfect weapon for a crit build, but not a good weapon for a status build, and this may limit the weapon in how you can configure it compared to the other two. At least that is the initial thought. So when one takes an initial look at the basic statistics, you notice that the Euphona Prime is a very impressive weapon. It has some very high statistics, albeit it is a little bit lopsided. It has the highest physical damage capability of all three weapons, although it is all in impact, and it does have small puncture and slash damage. It also has the highest critical chance and a whopping 2.5 critical multiplier. However, compared to that, it has a really low status chance. So once again, it is very impressive, but it initially looks like this weapon is only favored towards critical builds, and especially is useful for enemies such as the Corpus because of its high impact damage. That is until you realize that the Euphona Prime has an alt-fire capability, and its alt-fire statistics is very impressive. It has a huge slash value of 660, a very high puncture value of 176, which is even higher than that of the Lex Prime or the Aklex Prime, and in fact it's the impact value which is the lowest for the alt-fire. In addition, although the critical chance is a very tiny 2%, the status chance is now a very high 30%, so although this is not quite as high as that of Vaykor Marelok, it is high enough to be able to put a very strong status build together for the alt-fire capability. So this is a weapon that definitely favors its alt-fire capability. And though this weapon does have high critical and high status capabilities, since they are separated into main fire and alt fire, it's not the easiest weapon to mod for both capabilities. And so you do have to kind of favor one or the other. And under this circumstance, I'm not sure if anybody really cares because of its very impressive alt fire capabilities. So now when comparing these three weapons capabilities, I only want to do this using one configuration against one enemy faction, and the configuration I would like to use is the Corrosive build that I saw in one of Meme Sage's videos for the Euphona Prime. And the enemy I want to use it against is a Grineer Heavy Gunner. Now the reason I want to do this and not go over all the different types of mod builds and such is this isn't a video about optimizing the weapon for various factions for all three weapons, but basically just to look at the basic characteristics and how they compare amongst each other. And for that, I don't really need to go over every possible enemy, since if you look at it for one configuration and one enemy faction, you basically get the basic characteristics of how these three weapons compare to each other. So with that said, I would like to move ahead with regards to this weapon configuration. Okay, so first up we have the Euphona Prime, and I have to admit, this build that Meme Sage put together is very effective against the Grineer, and even some other factions. I've tried various other builds with regards to trying to improve on even the status capabilities, and I find that this one works really well because it has a good balance between blast and corrosive. If I try to go even higher in the blast side, then what it does is, since it procs more towards blast than corrosive under that sort of situation, it doesn't always give the most favorable results by putting the highest damage mods into there for this weapon. So this balance works pretty good because of the fact that you have a very high corrosive damage and a relatively high blast damage, and with that you really can strip away the armor of the Grineer very quickly. Also, this tends to work better than having a crit slash status build. I tried to do that as well by using Prime Pistol Gambit as well as Prime Target Cracker, and when you start removing some of the status mods or even Lethal Torrent to do so, then you find that you don't have as effective a weapon, especially in its alt-fire mode. So basically, as such, I decided to use this for my testing purposes. So now if you take a look at the statistics for the Euphona Prime, you notice that it has some very impressive numbers with a very large corrosive value, good blast value, and a very high impact value. However, you have to understand this is the main fire, not the outfire. If you recall, the outfire had almost 3 times the amount of physical damage that you see in the main fire. So although this is impressive, the outfire, which you don't see here, is even more impressive, almost by a factor of 3. So if you can imagine what sort of elemental damage and physical damage you would see for this sort of corresponding setup, you could imagine just how much damage outfire blast will give against an enemy. Okay, so with this setup, I'll be going up against one single level 60 arid heavy gunner, and I just want to see how many shots in outfire it will take to take this gunner out. And as you can see, you could literally one-shot them to death with this setup and this gun. Of course, if you noticed, I went right up to the heavy gunner to try out the weapon, which is of course the most advantageous for a shotgun. And so what I'm gonna try to do, there we go. What I'm gonna try to do is see how effective the outfire is from a distance. Okay, so although you still get the status effects, you notice that the damage is highly reduced to being almost insignificant. So you have to come up to close range to be able to get this devastating effect. Now, that does indicate that something is going on with regards to reduction of power. Whether you have high dispersion rates such that your beads are not hitting when you go too far out, or that your beads are losing power once you go a long distance. I'm not sure which one it is, but whatever the case, the outfire of the Euphona Prime significantly loses its effectiveness once you start going at a high distance. So now if we take a look at the Aklex Prime, although it's using the same mod configuration, you notice that the corrosive and blast damage values are much lower than that of the Euphona Prime, and that's basically because of the fact that, of course, these mods take the damage values from a percentage of the physical damage, and since the physical damage is lower than that of the Euphona Prime, the elemental damage is going to be lower as well. And so of course that limits the capability of the weapon to a percentage of what you expect for the Euphona Prime. However, of course, since this is a pistol and not a shotgun, it may not have the distance problems that you do see in the outfire for the Euphona Prime. Okay, so if we go up against the same level 60 arid heavy gunner, we'll see how the Aklex Prime does compared to the Euphona Prime. So 1, 2, 3. Actually, that's not too bad at all. So you kind of did expect that this might take a few more shots than the Euphona Prime's outfire, but it wasn't that bad. Now, just to make sure that this isn't a lucky shot, let's try this again. Okay, so here we go. Okay, so 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. Okay, so this time it took more, and my feeling is that probably it's because we have less headshots than we had in the previous one. So next I want to try one more time, except that I'm going to really focus on seeing if I could get as many headshots as possible. So let's try this again. One, 2. Okay, so that's pretty impressive. Okay, so 2 to 5 shots depending upon where you shoot. It's definitely more shots than the Euphona Prime, which you kind of expect. And the Euphona Prime, I mean, you could easily one-shot this level heavy gunner even without doing headshots. It doesn't really matter where you shoot, you seem to be able to one-shot them. Okay, so the next thing, however, is to shoot from a distance. So let's see. 1, 2, 3. Okay, so definitely because it's a pistol, the Lex Prime does much better than the outfire of the Euphona Prime at a distance. So it definitely shows that the Euphona Prime's outfire is extremely sensitive to distance and goes down significantly when you keep on doing that. Whereas with the Lex Prime, you don't have as severe a distance effect. Okay, so finally we have the Vaykor Marelok, and the Vaykor Marelok falls between the Aklex Prime and the Euphona Prime in terms of damage. It's slightly higher than the Aklex Prime, it's significantly lower than the Euphona Prime's outfire, so it might fall right in the middle, especially when you're up close. So it will probably do better than the Aklex Prime or the Lex Prime up close. Now what's interesting to see is what will happen in the distance, because although this is a pistol and it probably will do far better than the Euphona Prime's outfire at a distance, since its accuracy is lower than that of the Aklex Prime or the Lex Prime, it'll probably have more distance effects or distance reduction of this power than the aforementioned pistol. Okay, so trying it out against the same level 60 Arid Heavy Gunner, let's see how the Vaykor Marelok does. So let's first start up close, and 1, 2, yeah, okay. So it's a little bit hard to tell whether the Vaykor Marelok did better than the Aklex Prime, because if you remember, the Aklex Prime also was able to kill the Grineer Heavy Gunner with 2 shots at the low end. So I'm not sure if this was due to the fact that we were getting headshots here as well, or because this has a higher damage rating. So let's try this again. This time I won't particularly aim for the head. 2, 3. Okay, so it was still a fairly fast kill, even without aiming for the head. But again, I'm not sure if it's because of the location of where you shot the heavy gunner, or whether it's due to the weapon. What I can say is that although the damage of the Vaykor Marelok is higher than that of the Aklex Prime, it's probably close enough that you probably will be more influenced by where you hit the target compared to which weapon you use. In either case, as you can see here, 3, and one more shot, 4. Yeah, both the Aklex Prime and the Vaykor Marelok still are very hard-hitting weapons and can kill the level 60 Grineer Heavy Gunner with a few number of shots, and you kind of understand why both weapons are considered to be powerhouses amongst secondary weapons. So one more time. 1. Let me get in place here. 2, 3. Okay, so overall, the Vaykor Marelok does seem to be able to kill in about 2 to 3 shots. So maybe it's a little bit more powerful. Overall, it doesn't really matter when you're in a real play and you're running around all over the arena or the mission, going after multiple different enemies. You're probably not going to be able to tell too much of a difference between these two. Although with the Euphona Prime, since you can one-shot enemies, it's definitely a significant improvement over these other two when you're up close. Okay, so now let's take a look at how the Vaykor Marelok does when you're at a distance. And so since this is a pistol, it should do reasonably well. 1, 2, 3. Okay, so it still does kill in 3 shots. I'm not sure if this is less than that of the close shot, or if this still falls into the variations that you see. I don't think we have enough sampling of shots to really get a statistic here. Of course we don't. We only did 1 shot, and you never get a statistic with 1 shot. Anyway, however, it's probably close enough that you could say that although it may have some reductions in accuracy, at least from this distance, it's not really all that evident. Now, when you go to much farther distances, you probably will see the Vaykor Marelok fall below the Aklex, or the Lex Prime at least, because the Lex Prime is reputed as being almost like a sniper rifle, even for a secondary, and I don't think the Vaykor Marelok even comes close to that. However, at the distances that we saw here, which is somewhat a realistic distance that you do during the majority of missions, with the exception of maybe Exterminate where you're sniping from farther away, that actually might be a good representation. So in that case, both the Vaykor Marelok and the Aklex Prime does reasonably well since they're pistols, and it does far better than the Euphona Prime's outfire. Okay, so from this information alone, one might get the conclusion that although the Euphona Prime is an outrageously devastating weapon up close, it becomes highly ineffective farther away, and the Aklex Prime and the Vaykor Marelok are much more balanced weapons for any distance. However, this is not using any of the information from the Euphona Prime's main fire. And so if you start looking into the main fire capabilities of the Euphona Prime, which Loki has with him right now, then you can start changing the effectiveness at a distance. So you shoot the Grineer with the outfire just to get the corrosive proc in, and then you blast them away with the main fire. And since the main fire itself is a very impressive damage stat, you can use the main fire to destroy the enemy at a distance. So with the Euphona Prime, it's not that the weapon becomes ineffective at a distance, you just have to become creative with how you use the main fire and the outfire. So you could start with the outfire to get the corrosive procs to bring the defense down, and then as you can see, you could literally just one-shot them afterwards with the main fire. So even though you might have a few more shots than up close, using the outfire with the Grineer Heavy Gunner, it's still maybe a lower number of shots than either the Aklex Prime or the Vaykor Marelok. Now, since this is a shotgun, even with the main fire, you may eventually lose its effectiveness in being able to shoot the enemy. However, again, since this is a relatively standard sort of distance that you have in the majority of missions, overall the secondary works pretty well. And since secondaries you kind of think of as a closer weapon with your primary being your ranged weapon, then you can consider a loadout where you use a long range rifle for your primary weapon and the Euphona Prime for your secondary weapon for closer range, and that actually becomes a relatively good combination for a good majority of the mission. And in the very end, for medium to close range, it's starting to seem that nothing really beats the Euphona Prime in terms of sheer devastating damage. Okay, so in the end, although from an initial thought it looks like the Euphona Prime wins out if you want to compare these three in terms of just sheer damage, the joy of a weapon doesn't come just from the damage capability. Of course, everybody's going to be somewhat impressed with the Euphona Prime in terms of damage, and there aren't probably too many people who will find this weapon unsatisfactory. However, you know, a lot of people do like pistols. I like pistols. You have that interesting fun of just doing multiple shots repeatedly after another. And one thing nice about the Lex Prime, even more than the Aklex Prime, is that you can get good accuracy even at farther distance, and so you can do multiple shots and have a good time being a gunslinger. Now, of course, with the Euphona Prime, as you can see here, you could one-shot everybody to death, but there are some interesting characteristics with the Aklex Prime, and the Lex Prime, which make it a fun weapon to use. The other thing, of course, is for the Vaykor Marelok, there is the Justice Blast that you get from the Syndicate weapon. and some people do enjoy the capability of occasionally getting that blast to be able to get the benefits of that justice effect. And so for those people, they may find that the Vaykor Marelok is a very enjoyable weapon to use. Now, what's also finally quite interesting is the Euphona Prime, as nice as it is a mastery rank 14 weapon. And that makes it extremely difficult for many players to obtain, especially the newer players. And if you compare it to that, the Aklex Prime is a mastery rank of 0. So even a sheer beginner can go out if they have enough ways of getting the blueprints for the weapon to build the Aklex Prime and start using it right away. And for a beginner sort of weapon, the Aklex Prime is an extremely overpowering weapon. You can literally go on a rampage all over the beginner missions and probably one-shot everything to death, with the exception of maybe bosses. Even those you probably will find reasonable to do with such a devastating weapon. Now, the Vaykor Marelok has a mastery rank of 6, so it is higher than that of the Aklex Prime, but it is significantly lower and easier to get than the Euphona Prime. So it does arrange itself quite well, with the Aklex Prime being the lowest of the damage to be the easiest to obtain, the Vaykor Marelok being the next one, and the Euphona Prime being the highest damage and also the highest ranking requirement to get the weapon. They may have done this purposely, but overall, I think this choice gives a good majority of players a way of getting some very good secondary weapons that can do a significant amount of damage to the enemy. And so I hope they will continue to go out and create these sorts of weapons, because I do find the Euphona Prime to be very enjoyable. I do still enjoy the Aklex Prime or the Aklex Prime, as well as the Vaykor Marelok. So instead of trying to figure out which weapon to use, I'll probably keep all three, and in fact I'll probably go out and buy another set of blueprints for the Aklex Prime and build it again. In any case, I hope if you're looking into getting one of these weapons, this video turned out to be useful, and I thank you very much for watching this video. If you have any comments, please post them in the comments section below. I will leave a link to Mean Sage's video where he did do the various builds for the Euphona Prime, in case you're curious. In any case, it is always a pleasure to make these videos, and we will continue on with the Warframe videos in the future. We hope you will continue to join us in the Warframe experience, and until the next video, we wish you all the best with your Warframe gameplay, and as always, Jaya, nice day everyone.